I am going to make the assumption that I am live right now. Yay! Hello, everybody in internet land. Thanks for having me. My name is Benson Russell. I've been doing this for a while. Probably the most notable games I've worked on would be the ones when I was at Naughty Dog. I worked on all four Uncharted's. I worked on The Last of Us, Last of Us Left Behind, and I also did. Well, now that it's almost about to come out, I did was on the original pre-production team for The Last of Us 2. So, yay! Welcome to my talk. It's called Emotionally Intelligent Design, and I'll get into some of the details of that in just a second. Also, I'm not paying attention to the chat stream just at the moment, just because I've got my notes and stuff, and I'm going to go over the talk, and then at the end, I figured I can take questions. So, I don't know how that'll work in a streaming sense with people typing in and whatnot. So we'll see. Blah blah blah. Wait a minute. Oh, I did see one comment. Must feel nice to be able to say the name. Sure, it is nice. I even have my shirt on so you can see the Firefly logo. But anyways, it's also weird. I'm looking at the stream and it's behind by like 10 seconds. So I'm just like seeing a version of myself in the past, which is rather disturbing. But anyways, let us move on, shall we? All right. So why I wanted to talk about this particular issue. Basically, this is something that I felt strongly in as I've grown as a person in both my career and working with others. And it just come to realize that, it might seem like a no-brainer, but our emotions drive a lot of our decision-making process subconsciously. Basically, as humans, we're kind of like walking chemical sacks full of emotions, and emotions are what influence our every choice and decision in some way. It can be that a lot of times it's that little voice in the back of your head that gives you the little pros and the cons, the little devil and the angel that tends to pop up, that they protected or depict in movies and stuff. But it can affect your every choice, no matter how small that choice is, and it can lead to various outcomes that can have drastic or very good effects on not just the game you're designing, but also your pipeline and your workflow, and just how you get along as a team. Right. I mean, we all know that there's various people that sometimes you might be like, oh, I got to walk on eggshells around that person. Ooh, that person's very micromanagey. Or, oh, this person's really great to get along with. And they're just always a lot of energy and fun. But it can lead to everything from like procrastination to being willing to work yourself ragged. It's all affected by your emotions. And as also with all forms of art, our goal is as game makers is to make an emotional connection with our audience. And in this case, being the player, obviously. The better we understand our emotions and how they drive us, the better we can create our art to give that emotional impact. So hopefully you'll find this interesting at the very least. And given my wonderful involuntary responses, my mouth's already going dry. Good thing I have that there. Anyways, smart thinking, being prepared. The first part of this talk is going to be in two parts. So the first part will be talking about how our emotions actually work and affect our body and our behavior. And then the second part will show how these patterns can be related to several aspects of game development. That's where the rubber meets the road, if you will. Now I'll be talking about this in very basic and general terms. So you should not need a doctorate to follow along. I apologize if you do. And if you are or happen to be a doctor, please forgive my oversimplified explanations. Also, just to note, I am not a psychologist or an expert in psychology. These are my personal observations and lessons I've learned over the past decade or so, doing a lot of research, going to counseling, therapy, and learning more about myself and how emotions have not only impacted my relationships, but just my everyday mentality, and seeing that how expanded and affected both my work and just observing others, seeing like, oh, once you start to kind of realize how this stuff works, you can kind of start to see people, and when you see people behave to you a certain way, you can kind of start to realize, oh, I kind of see, how there's some classifications I'll get into in a minute of where people tend to fall into how they deal with emotions. And you can kind of say, oh, this person's a such and such, this person's a such and such, and it helps give you better tools on how to deal with conflict with those people, and also gives you empathy because you understand where people are coming from. And so while this isn't going to be a psychology class, so I'm trying not to make a psychology class. I know a lot of you guys are probably fresh out of college or students. Last thing you want is another, it's like, yes, sir, do your homework. No. We will be talking about the F word and feelings. We all love those. We all love that word. So emotional intelligence. What? Sorry. So I got distracted by the chat again. ADD, wonderful. Emotional intelligence, and what is it? So by definition, it's the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions, and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. Almost made it through without slipping. It's also known as EI for short, or EQ, which also stands for emotional quotient. It's become a buzzword in business circles. So if you think you've kind of heard this term before, that might be why. It relates to one's ability to recognize and regulate emotions in both the self and social environments. It's also how well you can control your emotions rather than letting them control you. So, for example, when you get angry, do you tend to just fly off the handle and aren't really thinking and considering what you're about to say, or do you pause and consider your words and actions, knowing the consequences that they will bring? So, that's what emotional intelligence is in the definition. How does the brain work emotionally? All right. In the simplest of explanations, and again, if you're a doctor, don't shoot me. At the base of the brain, where the spine connects, is the feeling center of the brain. It's called the limbic system. For the most part, stimuli from sensory input, like eyes, ears, nose, whatever, goes through the feeling center first. The limbic center, and it hits this first before it goes to the cognitive reasoning and logic center, also known as the cerebral cortex. This also allows you to react quickly and involuntarily as necessary. Get into that in a little bit, a little more on that in a bit, rather. The stimuli is processed by mapping it to your memory of the situation. So, and then that creates a database for later lookup. So the idea is that, hey, the stimuli happened, created this thing. Well, it was part of this memory. Now let's store that away so that way I can recall that information and react as quickly as possible later on. The limbic system is also responsible for autonomous control over your physiological functions like breathing, heart rate, distributing adrenaline and dopamine, pupil dilation, things like that. So as stimuli come in, they're compared to the map database, and an emotional response is created. The stronger the stimuli, the stronger it is mapped, meaning the stronger the emotional response. So, see, this is why things like PTSD can have such a strong grip on our behavior, because a lot of times something that is so traumatic is such a creates such a strong emotional connection in that database. And also note that thoughts and existing memories are stimuli that feed back into the limbic system. So hence why you can get an emotional response from thinking about things that have gone through. So what is an emotional response? Well, before I can answer that, pause. An emotion carries with it a cognitive component, thought, a physiological component like breathing, heart rate, and chemical, and a behavioral component, like facial, body language, all the weird stuff you're seeing my face do right now while I'm talking to what appears to be nobody. This is interesting, giving a talk, just trusting that it's going out into the wild. So it's an involuntary reaction mapped to a memory. They are temporary, unlike a mood. So like moods can last days, months, long time. These are really temporary things, and they have varying levels of intensity, as discussed, and they can be positive or negative. For example, someone jumping out and scaring you will create anxiety, adrenaline, get your body ready for that fight or flight mentality. It can cause your hands to raise up in preparation for defense, etc. But your memory of the situation can affect the intensity and the degree to which these responses happen. So if, say, your significant other loves to hide and jump at you every time you come home, I swear I don't do that. Sorry. This could make it a positive, fun experience with very little fear. Whereas being in the dark in a strange place where you're already expecting danger can be a very different experience. This whole process allows our brains to reflexively respond to stimuli, which is why you usually feel an emotion about something before you really had a chance to think about it. And this is what I was mentioning earlier, that the limbic system processes the signal first, and therefore it can create autonomous responses that just happen before you even had a chance to be cognitive about it. Now, this all evolved from the need of survival rather than being in a civilized society. So the ability to innately sense danger and respond reflexively, like I see a dinosaur over there, let's not go near it, that kind of thing. Let's walk over here. Granted, I don't think humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time, but whatever. Flintstones were fun. the examples of those moments when people have reacted to danger, yet don't remember actively doing so, such as you've heard, you might have experienced this yourself. You've heard stories of it where someone jumps out of the way of an oncoming car, but has no memory of actively doing so. They just remember. It's like, what happened? I don't know. Uh, but many of us also just don't understand how deeply or subtly our emotions make us behave, even if we are considered to be well adjusted and very good at managing our emotions. So let's look at one of the key areas in which we are affected the most. For most of this next bit of information, it's I'm taking a lot of what I've learned from a very good book that I recommend called How We Love by Kay and Milan Yurkovich. I can give that information out afterwards. Um, I highly recommend this book. It is a relationship counseling book, but I found that the information will help you gain not only a better understanding of yourself, but how to better relate and understand to people in general, regardless of whether you're in a relationship or not. And just also one other note to mention about it, it it does have a slight Christian element because the authors are Christian, but the information and the principles are rooted in psychology, not religion. So you can skip over any of the religious texts if you want to, and then just go right on to the actual psychology of it. So the most common and powerful emotions we tend to feel are negative emotions, which are like anxiety, fear, humiliation, helplessness, vulnerability, and anger. And sadly, they're usually the easiest and first emotions we tend to feel. And this is a part of our evolutionary process designed to help keep us alive. Goes back to that instinctive response, like, oh my God, a dinosaur. No, I don't want to go near it. Or meat eating tiger, or man eating tiger. Let's get away from that. And how these things form is we are products of our upbringing. So the early years, and this goes even as an infant, which not many people can, I don't know of anyone that can remember back to being a little baby in the crib going, um, these were key to helping us develop and inform how we handle and process these negative emotions. And this is because from that early on, the limbic system is mapping these feelings to memories over time. So subconscious patterns and habits begin to form in how we handle these situations. So we not only need to reflect and dissect our upbringing to sort this out, but also become aware of our feelings and when we're having them so we can try to begin to understand them. So with this in mind, there are 6 general categories that we kind of fall into with regards to how we handle these negative emotions. And while we can definitely have traits that fit into multiple categories, there is almost always a dominant one. So, and these are not really in any particular order. This is just saying what they are. So most of them are pretty self-explanatory. So like the first type is called the avoider. And as you might guess, it means you tend to do your best you can to avoid stressful situations. Uh, this is the way this tended to form was like you didn't receive much affection and were often taught to be a self-reliant and independent kid. So you learn to restrict feelings and needs, as well as avoid situations that will cause anxiety. You also never discussed or talked about your feelings much, so you don't like being emotional or the feeling of being vulnerable. If you've ever heard the term latchkey kids, they tend to fall into this kind of category. The next category is the vacillator, and that means, if you don't understand, is oscillating between two extremes. Uh, so you go from being like really happy one moment to being like absolutely angry the next moment to being like really happy, whatever, and you tend to not be able to trust. You're always looking for the other shoe to drop, so you never can really trust what the outcomes are going to be. Having unpredictable parents meant love and affection came sporadically. Hence, you were always waiting for the other shoe to drop, so you can never trust anything or be happy when things do go your way because you always expect the worst to happen and that happiness isn't going to last. This creates a lot of trust issues, especially when things start becoming less than perfect, and you're very sensitive to when something is pulling away from you, to when something or someone is pulling away from you. You feel like no one really understands you or your needs, so you tend to have a lot of internal conflict and stress. And you might have heard a lot of others say that it can be like walking on eggshells dealing with you. The next category is the controller. Pretty self-explanatory. You learn that if you have control, you won't ever have to deal with feelings of helplessness or humiliation, anxiety, or vulnerability. This is because nobody protected you from harm. So it's better to be in control than be controlled. Using anger and intimidation allows you to try and remain in charge. You like to solve problems by yourself as you want things done your way, or you tend to get very angry. The next category is a pleaser. Self-explanatory again. When growing up, there was an overly critical parent or set of parents or family members or siblings or whatever that you had to spend most of your energy on learning to appease them. This stayed with you so that now you've learned that by trying to please and handle everyone else around you, that you'll have less stress and anxiety to deal with. You can't handle rejection or others being annoyed or upset with you, so you like to try and keep the peace by meeting everyone else's needs. So you're not very good with saying no or setting up boundaries, which results in your needs never getting met. And that ends up usually having a lot of built up tension and anger and resentment, so that sometimes you'll just blow up unexpectedly. Uh, Next category, and we're almost done, is the victim. This is an actual like victim, like someone that was a product of being in a toxic environment. Like you grew up in a chaotic and extremely toxic environment. You learned to stay invisible by keeping your feelings and desires to yourself and always going with the flow to avoid any anger or someone lashing out at you. So you're used to the chaos. And anytime you're in like a calm situation, it tends to make you anxious as you're just waiting. You assume something bad must be around the corner. Usually you'd have a very low sense of self-worth and feel like you're just going through the motions because you're afraid if you speak up, someone will lash out at you. And you'll also have a lot of suppressed emotions and anger built up, so you can have moments of intense anger and lashing out, very similar to the pleaser. Uh, the last, the last group is the secure connector, and hey, that's the golden child. That's what everyone wants to strive to be. You know how to handle your stuff perfectly. Yay! There are obviously so many of those in the world. Okay. Now, since I last gave this talk, there's one other condition I wanted to go over with some new findings and study going into another way that they're finding that is affecting how people respond to stress and anxiety. Now, this is being done by Greg Lukinoff and Jonathan Haidt. They have a book out called "The Coddling of America," "The Coddling of the American Mind," that came out several years ago, and the intention is, while the 6 types I listed above deal with how a person learns to handle stressful and anxiety situations that a person is exposed to, this new study involves the problems that develop when an outside agent, namely a parent or a guardian, outright removes the stressful situation entirely. Um, the simple synopsis is that parents, or this outside agent, with the best of intentions, are starting to consider the children as overly fragile. So they want to keep their children from having to deal with any kind of stress or anxiety. So the parents try to keep their children from encountering stressful situations entirely. The parents also start to handle these situations for their children, or are willing to do anything to rid the children of any sadness or anxiety caused by stressful situations, rather than letting the child learn how to handle the anxiety on your own. This is also known as helicopter parenting. The problem with this is that the only way our body and mind learn to deal with stress and anxiety is to be exposed to it. It's much like our immune systems. The only way to create and develop a healthy tolerance of the things is by being safely exposed. So, for example, one of the things they found was when there was the rise in all the peanut allergies years ago, they did some studying and started to realize, like, oh, people were getting scared of, it has a very drastic effect. So they started to not take stop eating peanuts while they were breastfeeding, or feeding to their children when they were old enough. They weren't giving them peanut butter enough. And as it turns out, the only way to build up an immunity to getting the peanut allergy is to be introduced to that stuff as early as possible. So they did studies and controlled studies and tests on this, and found that, yeah, the more, if you're introduced to peanuts at an early age, whether the mom is eating them while she's feeding the child, or as the kid gets older giving them peanut butter, they have a much greater chance of generating a proper peanut tolerance. So that way they don't have to deal with the peanut allergy. So it's that same kind of thing as there is with dealing with how we learn to handle stress and anxiety. It's, you have to be exposed to those situations so that way you can learn how to handle it. Uh, and for children that have been brought up with this kind of parenting, they don't have a proper framework for dealing with things that make them uncomfortable. Hence, their natural reaction seems to be a combination of the avoider and victim, as discussed earlier, and also a little bit of controller. There's an expectation that someone else will come and handle this for them. And when that doesn't happen, they might demand that others change the world for them because they have no methods for processing the stress and anxiety. So those are all the categories and kind of general things that we fall into while we're trying to deal with these stressful type of emotions. For example, I myself am an avoider. That's my dominant category. I have little bits of, pleaser and a few other things, and one of the other ones, but the avoider is my general tendency. And I'll give you some examples of how that affected me in a little bit. And this isn't just about big and obvious bad situations like, ooh, meat-eating tiger or man-eating tiger. It's, every little situation in your life. So some personal examples for me, or for example, is social anxiety. You know, being around people was always kind of awkward for me, being just the way based on my upbringing. So I tend to like not. I just started not going out to events and hanging out with people as much as I used to. Uh, Fear of failure or mental blocks can lead to excessive procrastination and aversion because I'm just avoiding. Like, you know what, if I don't do the work, I won't have to worry about feeling the fear that I'm having a mental block or that I'm going to fail. Such as, or, you know, that could lead to like never wanting to give a talk to a large group of people, even though you really want to. You find that also, like on your days off, you can kind of find that they go by wasted. You don't really want to start anything. You just kind of sit on the couch and just watch TV or play video games. Uh, so another example is when I was working at 2015 back in the day, and I lived in Tulsa. Um, my driver's license got suspended, and I didn't know about it. So I was driving, doing an errand. Cop pulled me over for whatever reason and decided to arrest me. Because of I was driving a suspended license. Didn't know. And sorry, I'm getting distracted by Discord. And what ended up happening is once the cuffs went on me, I started panicking, and it turns out I have a form of agoraphobia. It's like a fear of a loss of control. So when my hands were behind my back, I realized, oh my God, I can't. If something happens, I can't defend myself. I can't, do anything to make sure that I can get out of the situation safely. So that created like a PTSD type symptom where now my avoider tendency was like I didn't want to do things like be in very heavy traffic. I'd be sitting in my car and stop traffic on some freeway and start having like being panicked because I'm like, oh my God, I'm trapped. I can't do anything, even though I could just get out the car and walk. It's an irrational fear at that point. But it also meant things like going into big heavy crowds. So I would avoid things like going to E3 or conventions or like game dev drink ups or something like that. Even got to the point where I didn't want to go into buildings. I remember going into a Home Depot to get some materials to make a project, and I was all the way in the back of the building, and I couldn't see the exit anymore, and I started freaking out because it's a big warehouse type thing, and I'm like, oh my God, how far am I to the exit? I can't get out. I have no control. Yeah. So that's just some examples from my life of like just everyday situations on how my avoidant tendency would make me behave. So basically, stressful situations are always happening. Many of them can go unnoticed, and how we've been conditioned to respond to them will dictate much of our behavior. That's the end of part one. Yay! And everyone's like, good, shut up, stop talking, stop giving me class notes. I don't want to be in class right now. I had to deal with class all year. All right, part two. So let's get on to the actual part. We talk about how this affects game development. So first topic, working with others. That's an obvious one. So an obvious example is someone that is with a controller trait can be very difficult to work with, as they always have to have their way, and they can be overly aggressive about it. It could also be someone that tends to micromanage others due to this lack of trust. A victim might not want to speak up in a meeting, so that could result in never getting their voice heard or their ideas or concerns for fear of what others might have to say about their ideas. They don't want to put themselves out there. A pleaser very much might say yes to everything that is asked of them. This is grossly overburdening themselves and never being able to meet their schedule because they just don't know how to say no. A vacillator might never trust the feedback that's been given to them, hence they constantly second guess themselves and their abilities. One key area where we all need to be really good working with each other is when it comes to gameplay feedback. Obviously, that's like one of the biggest tenets of game design in general is iteration and getting feedback on that iteration. If we can't be as open and honest as possible, then we're doing ourselves a disservice to the game and the team. Now, of course, it doesn't mean being rude or mean, but I can give you an example. As an avoider, it's influencing me not to seek out others, for example, to playtest my work. Some of it was due to the fear of not being perceived well by my peers. So I'm like, I made something, or I need to get it focused. I need to go grab someone in the office to test it. Well, what if they don't like it, or what if they think? What if they don't think I'm living up to my seniority, or whatever it is, or that people look at it and say like, oh, that's a very beginner thing. You're supposed to be a senior designer of X years. Why the hell why'd you design that? Other times it's also just due to like, I didn't want to bother people. I knew everyone was busy and, having to tap them on the shoulder and like, I know what it's like when I'm really busy and engaged in work. I got my headphones on and, somebody disturbs me. You're just like, you get that, you don't want to deal with that. Those are both stressful situations. So my avoider tendency would kick in and think of excuses. And this is kind of a really good example of what I mean when I talk about even the smallest situations will be influenced by how you handle your emotions. And by becoming more emotionally intelligent, I was able to better recognize when these were happening and start making changes for the better. And I'll give some examples of how I changed at the end. It can also affect the feedback you give. So giving critiques can be very stressful for some. And depending on your traits, you'll adjust your feedback without realizing it. So, for example, being less honest because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings, to just complete avoidance, saying like, "Oh yeah, it was great. Yeah, awesome. No, I got no feedback." Because you love it when those are the people you get testing a thing. You're like, really, nothing? You didn't even hate the button press there, like when I made you jump into the pit of doom. I mean, what? And then had the giant alligator come up, spit you out, and do it over and over again, and waste 15 minutes of your time. That didn't bother you? Okay. It's funny side note. On Uncharted 2 and 3, not purposefully, I held the record for combat encounters that killed the most number of focus testers and made them stay in the area the longest. I think it was, if you ever played Uncharted 2, there was a section in you topple it. You're trying to get on this train that's moving away, that's got this dagger, the MacGuffin that you're trying to chase. And you get into this train car, it rolls over, it topples over, and you see the train rolling away, and you have this giant, you're pinned down, and you have this giant defense scenario that happens for a while. The intention was to give this sense of like desperation while you're seeing your goal move away, but you can't get to it. I think we had a focus tester that died 120 times on that encounter, something like that. Yeah, like that. Those moments make you feel bad, but yeah, because anyways, yeah. Funny side note, that I just figured it'd be a fun little story to tell right there. Anyways, but yeah, being less honest to not hurt someone's feelings, to complete avoidance can do that. Also, with regards to giving critiques, it can also affect how receptive you are to receiving feedback, as it can be taken as a reflection of you as a person, right? You might not want to have the feedback because, as I was saying earlier, you might look at it as yourself as like, oh man, I've been doing this for so long. How could I design something like this? This isn't beholden to like what I feel my level of design ability should be at this stage of my career, etc. And as we know, honest and critical feedback is one of the most important aspects to creating good gameplay. It can separate the 80 rated game from the 90. So like that has all been an example of like how it could just affect you and how you relate with others in a very important element of game design workflow. Hey, and speaking of workflow, category workflow issues. While making games is a fun and creative endeavor, it's also emotionally stressful, meaning the actual act of discovery and implementation brings with it elements of social stress. I've been going over this a bit. Thoughts of competency, regardless of your discipline. Will people think this code or script is cleverly written? And I don't mean good. I mean like you might get to that point where there's always that kind of a little bit of competition amongst all the disciplines in a healthy way. But and I don't know if anyone's going to get this reference if it's maybe this is going to date me. Will I achieve elite hacksaw status? There's always this concept of like, will someone look at my script or my code and say like, oh yeah, that's very cleverly written. That's a sign of a coding genius. Like you might feel like that's the level you need to obtain. No, you just need it to work. But this is a social stress that you might end up putting on yourself. Is my art or animation up to the rest of the team? As in, I see what other people are doing. Is what I'm doing on par with that? Will people think this gameplay or mechanic is fun and worthy of even being tried? Also, some questions of, are my ideas good enough? I'm in a brainstorming meeting and, do people think my ideas are stupid? Or do people hate it when I bring up ideas? Like, do I get the sense that people are rolling their eyes or something like that? This will influence your participation and your collaboration. And again, that's another key tenet to good game design and good game making is we need to work as a team. We need to be able to have all hands on deck. You need a leader that guides it and makes sure that applies the razor of focus to make sure that, yes, we're staying on message of what this game is about. We're sticking to the pillars of the game, but you still need people to contribute and to give, even the most weird cockeyed or cockamamie ideas that can come out of a brainstorm meeting can spark someone else to think of something else. Like that's part of the process. Do people consider me a gamer based on the games I like or dislike? You know, many times you go hang out with your buddies at lunch or whatever, and you're talking about the games you're playing recently. And do you ever think like, someone going to be like, you're playing that game? It's kind of like, you listen to Britney Spears? Sorry, if you listen to Britney Spears, there's nothing wrong with Britney Spears. But, well, maybe there is. Pop music. Whatever. I'm not going to get into the musical argument. See, that's a whole other conversation. Do I actually belong here making games in the first place? We all know that one. Imposter syndrome. This can cause all kinds of small behavioral issues in the day-to-day process of making games. So some examples I had to overcome as an avoider. I wouldn't want to put things well, let me step back. As a writer, you say, just put things on the page and try it, right? And so if you take that to like a game design sense, it's just, this is what they mean by rapid iteration. Just put stuff in simply so that way you can rapidly iterate on stuff, putting stuff on the page. I wouldn't want to do that because I wanted everything to be awesome the first time for fear of competency. And again, we know games are an iterative process, so that's a hamper to workflow. Fear of mental blocks would keep me from wanting to try new directions if I had something I felt was good. The concept of like, the best way to describe it is I called it, again, this is going to date me again. I called it record store syndrome. See, back in the day, there were these things called record stores. You walk into them and they'd have all the records. You go buy them. You didn't download them. Yeah, now I sound like a grandpa. But I remember, this applies to everything. Record store syndrome was when I could think of every album I wanted when I wasn't in the store. The moment I walked in the store, I couldn't remember it worth a darn. Like it all just left my brain. And thankfully, someone at the last time I gave this talk helped me look up. I think it's called Presque-Vu, is the name of this, the name of the syndrome that happens. And the quick note on that one is the way looking it up is the way your brain works is the way it recalls information is it tries to. So many analogies to computer programming and just being with computers in general with our human minds. The way it tries to work is it takes that giant database of knowledge and it tries to filter out what it thinks it isn't relevant to what you're trying to think of at the time, and that's how it narrows it down to the brief list of things that you want, and then it helps refine and give you the information and be able to recall it. The problem, though, and a lot of people have this, is the record store syndrome or Presque-Vu is your brain accidentally filters out the information you are trying to recall, and that can lead to that moment of like, what was I trying to remember? And then when you're not thinking about it, it'll just pop into your brain. But regardless of that, going about fear of mental blocks, back on the fear of mental blocks, I had to learn that it was okay to throw it all away and start over if necessary in the search for fun, because that could be what's required. I had to learn not to hold on to existing work just because I feared of not being able to come up with a new idea. And also I learned that, the more I just was like, okay, if I got into this state, I'm like, you know what, just do it. Just throw. I don't care if it's 3 boxes and 3 enemies. Just shove them in the room and start playing the environment, and let's see what happens. Because the moment you start putting it on stick, the moment you start trying it, things will just come about. And usually, I could find like, oh, well, if I did this, or I moved this, or put this person here, did that, and this, then that's how ideas would just spark. Also prevent me from not really wanting to learn new workflows or pipelines for other disciplines. So there's obviously a lot of stress in learning a new tech as quickly as possible, as there's always a time pressure. And there's also a social pressure related to this, as in, do I think others will judge me for my ability to inability to pick up something quickly with or without immediate mastery? Just is someone looking at you like, oh, clearly this person should be able to pick up person that has never programmed a day in their life should be able to pick up Visual Studio and program an entire engine from scratch in 3 days. Yeah. We're not all John Carmack, or Tim Sweeney. We can't do that. There's also personal interactions that you have to deal with helping others to learn it. And that goes back to the concept of like, hey, you have to tap someone on the shoulder, bother them. They're trying to do something and ask them to come explain something to you. You feel bad about that. And dealing with that personal interaction adds stress. And then also the concept that, if this is a tool you're not using a lot, you're just trying to learn it to help out with something, and then you got to go back to it months later, most likely you're going to forget it. And then you're going to feel like a loser because you forgot it. And then you have to learn it again. And then you got to ask for more help, and it reinforces the entire cycle like a giant ball of poop rolling down a hill of more poop. So All right. Quick note about being able to move past the imposter syndrome, since I did mention it. Aside from technical competency, which of course is a must, remember that games are highly subjective pieces of art. And while we do need financial success to continue doing what we love, the critical acclaim isn't the be all end all definition of you as a game maker. So you have to take that and believe that, yes, you do belong here because your ideas are no less valid than anyone else's. Especially if you maintain an open mind and willingness to learn and push forward, and a willingness to work with others that use different methods and styles. In other words, don't fret over your coding, art, or animation style not being the most elite hacksaw, because unless it's not technically competent or it can't fit the needed requirements for that thing, it doesn't matter. And sure, there are lessons people have learned and can be passed down. These lessons tend to create baseline conventions we use moving forward. But even those can be changed or be challenged at any time. Look at how many games have bucked conventions continuously, or somebody will make a game about saying like, "Oh, you shouldn't do that in games." Well, I'm going to make a game about that, and then sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. But in the end, the emotional connection we make with the player is all that counts. If breaking conventions made it happen, sweet, so be it. Cheers. Felt right to say that right there. The way not having launch is kind of nice because I can just be as silly and stupid as I want and be like, I don't care. No. Character and story creation are another element of game design. Obviously, the more you understand your emotions, the more you can add to your characters. Right? If you're writing story and story usually has characters or elements that you're trying to make the player feel a certain way. If you understand how you feel those emotions, then you can add those to your characters. So maybe looking at these different categories of like, oh, you know what? It makes sense that if I'm trying to write somebody that's say you're making a game, and I'm totally off the cuff here. You're making a game off The Devil Wears Prada, right? And you're trying to write the devil in that scenario. Like, okay, let's make her a controller. That this is the reason she is why she is, and then, but also maybe you might want to add that she's part victim because that breeded the certain senses of what she needed to get and overcome to get to where she is now, and hence made her a controller, whatever. But like being able to approach a character from the emotional side of that element can give you a good background into why a character might say what they need to say, and let you write dialogue for it or create motivation for their actions and stuff like that. And it also can bleed into story. Is like you can give them as good elements of backstory to layer in, so that way the user, the player, will actually get a sense of like, oh, I can understand why that character is going through that, and now I can start to have empathy for that character. And then you start to create good, complex storylines, that have a lot of layers, as opposed to just like being. That's on the nose if you didn't get it. Never mind. All right. Gameplay analysis. So another thing about understanding your emotions, and this is something I learned from working with Bruce Straley, because he was by far a master of this. Whenever I just watching him play test sections was incredible to see how you do this. It's the ability of digging down and uncovering the emotions you feel while the game is evoking them. And this can definitely be the difference between and woo, this is great. And so, for example, like, and this is something I've taken to heart. So when I play as a lead, when I play test other people's work, I'm trying to figure out, okay, what am I feeling? Play it a couple times. What am I feeling here? And then you have to dig down, like, why am I feeling it? And better you understand that, is the better you can sit there and say, okay, I'm feeling frustrated. Why am I frustrated? Okay, what's happening here? Oh, you know why I'm frustrated? Because I'm coming in and the view angle I have sucks, and I'm getting hit from the side and I don't know it, and it feels bad. Oh, and it also feels bad because the controls don't let me turn to that easily and be able to lock onto that guy, be able to take him out. So there's a layout problem here, as well as maybe we need to reevaluate our controls. It's really digging in and tapping into that level of just like, or even like, this is making me anxious. Why am I anxious? It's just asking those questions and filtering it down. And as I would watch Bruce do that, you just see magic form at times. I don't know how else to describe it. He was by far one of the most like influential mentors that I could have possibly worked with. And also, as mentioned before, when it comes to gameplay analysis, it's a social interaction that can play a big part in not giving honest feedback. So it's another reason you need to be aware of your emotions and how you deal with others. Gameplay, what I call gameplay tone crafting. So obviously, like I've said multiple times, this game is art. Art is about extracting emotions and creating connections with the player. So one of the things you can do is you can craft your gameplay to make sure that it is in line to evoke the emotions you want and provide an emotional ride. Now, this might not be relevant to every game, but I feel even in as simple as a puzzle game, like I'm playing Two Dots right now on. It's a little mobile game where you just drag and you connect dots of different colors, and there's all these things that can prevent that from happening in the way that they move. And so it's like a Connect 3 game. It's kind of like that kind of thing. But even something as simple as that, if you wanted to create an emotional arc, you could do it. And you could do it as simple as like, well, hey, let's like create a bit of it. Like there's a main path in the main menu is more like, okay, here's the next level. And it's on a path. And the path is winding through this little fun set of background art and all this kind of cool stuff. You could change the art. You could have it also and go dark and stormy to like bright and sunny to, and it's all very stylized. So kind of Dr. Seuss-esque, where it's like the area I'm going through right now is dark with these like little monster-shaped eyes that are just like blinking up out of the dark and stuff like that. So you could use these elements even in something as simple as that. If you're a story game, obviously you definitely want to do this because you want the story beats to mar with the gameplay. I mean, Naughty Dog is famous for this, and we did this a ton. One example that stands out is in Uncharted 2. If you've played that, there's we called it Jeff the Cameraman sequence where you're trying to escape from this temple with Elena and Jeff and Chloe. And what ends up happening is Jeff gets injured, and he's just a cameraman, right? He's there with Elena. Is it? Jesus Christ! I hope I'm getting the name right. I hope it's Elena. It's been that long since I've dealt with Uncharted. Yes. So the whole sequence, like the whole thing leading up to that sequence, is it starts out when you're in this Nepal. Is it Nepal? This is how long it's been. Jesus, 10 years or something like that. Oh my gosh. Anyways, you get into this town and you start at the top of this hotel and you see a bright view of like, hey, I see the horizon. It's a sunny day. It's just an amazing vista view. It's bright. It just evokes this feeling of like adventure, but there is a storm off in the distance. And as you work your way down lower and lower to get back down to street level to find this temple in this town, you're getting more pressed by the buildings. You're getting more pressed by the different types of encounters that are happening. The storm is also moving in. It's getting a little more windy, getting more rain. It starts to get rainy and stuff like that. So eventually you go into this temple, do what you need to do, and then all hell breaks loose, and now you have to fight your way out of this temple. And it just starts becoming harder. You're hitting more of a brick wall. When you come out, it's like totally raining. The cameraman's got an injured leg. There's this conflict going on between the two other characters of Chloe and Elena, where it's like Chloe's like, get the hell out of here, leave him behind. He's just going to slow us down, and I cannot be caught by the main bad guy because she was a double agent. And Elena is like, no, we can't leave him behind. I'm not going to leave him to die. And Drake is character of honor. He's like, I'm not going to leave him to die either. So Drake picks him up. And now we have this whole gameplay where it's like your movement is stinted. You cannot take cover. You cannot do anything defensive. You have to rely on your friends. And to these ever increasing encounters that just get more and more stressful while you're trying to lug this character around through and make it eventually to the point where the main bad guy does find you and he ends up killing him, executing him. And it's also getting more dark and more stormy, and there's like louder thunder and there's like louder environment events that happen. That whole thing was crafted from and that's like 3 hours of gameplay, 2 hours of gameplay, something like that. The whole thing was crafted to take you on that ride. So yeah, understanding what evokes these emotions is what helps to do that. Long diatribe about that. But anyways, and what time? Oh boy, I gotta wrap up. Good, I'm all the way down. I'm down to the end. As I said, I want to give a little bit about how I learned to overcome certain things. So ideally, the best ways that you learn to it's excellent word behavioral I forgot. Cognitive behavioral therapy, I think it is. CBT is what the initials are. And the idea is that you're rewriting the connections, or rewiring the connections in your brain based on cognitive behavioral therapy. That's it. So the idea is that you're all like, you catch yourself in the moment of something and then you flip it. Like, and I mean by verbally saying something out loud, like, for example, I could be a little angry at traffic out here in Los Angeles. It is a bit of a dog, and you tend to, someone cuts you off, you just want to start going off and just start yelling. I didn't want to be that way anymore. It's just like, why do I need the stress? So anytime I learned that every time I started feeling that way, you start telling yourself like, okay, city of 13 million people, there are idiots that drive here, and the idiots are compacted on each other. There's nothing you can do about it. There's no reason to yell. And by doing that over and over again, it can take a while. You start to like, oh, okay, I start to get a little more mellow and start to get, taking that out. So with that in mind, that's ideally, you should do it in the moment when you're feeling these emotions. Else try to really remember the situation and lock into your brain and the feelings so we can analyze it later. And the first thing you got to do is you have to learn to step outside of yourself and recognize when you're having an emotional response. And then you have to see, and basically, and what I mean by stepping outside of yourself, you have to just look at yourself objectively as outside of the emotion and be like, why am I feeling this way? Is this emotional response warranted for the situation that I have? And then start digging to find the true reason why that feeling is happening now. This is also a way a lot of, if you ever go to therapy or counselors or whatnot, this is a lot of the same processes that they will use. So you start asking why, and you play the why game. It's like, well, why do I feel this way? Well, this. Well, why does that bother me? This. Well, why is that a problem? Well, this. Well, why? You basically play the 4-year-old child with yourself. And why? But wow. Someone should make a game about that. You just hit a button and it just says, but wow. And then just watch the player throw the controller into the screen. Anyways, the other things to ask are, and because we are products of our upbringing, are there any memories from your childhood that come to a lot of times when I was in therapy and stuff like that, or going to counseling, it's, a lot of times you would start thinking about, like, just naturally, of like situations that would happen when I was a kid. I'm like, why is that popping in my mind right now? Or even funny ideas. Like, even if you can't think of anything specific, like, keep your mind. There's a method of like keeping your mind open and just thoughts. I'm like, even if it's just like pancakes. Why are pancakes coming to my mind? Oh, wait a minute. That's because I had to make the batter and I got frustrated because I dropped an egg on the floor when I was a kid and my mom scolded me. Oh, that's why, because she scolded me. But you can, even the simplest little thing, your brain has a really weird way of working, as you can tell by my talk and the way I'm giving this talk. Yeah, our brains have really interesting ways to give us clues to recall these things in the moment if we're actively trying to search for them. And it can take whole times to try and figure this stuff out. But once you get an idea of like, oh, I think this is why I'm feeling this way is because of this thing that happened. Now you can start to understand how to fix it. So, and the other thing is you can also use this as you can find examples in the workplace that trigger these same feelings, right? You might understand, like, why am I always angry at this coworker? Why is it when this person does X, it really makes me feel whatever. It's like, then you can start finding the examples of like, oh, it's because of this when I was a kid. Well, is that rational? That's not really rational. Well, then let me figure out let me find ways to work that back, either through CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Find ways like using that or research. The internet is a wonderful, vast resource. There's plenty of notes on there and ideas of ways you can make yourself try to get rid of this stuff. And then once you can point to I've already been going over this. Look, I got ahead of myself. Once you can point to the origin of the feeling, it's easy to catch yourself and make an adjustment in the future. So it's one of those things where you do stuff subconsciously or involuntarily and not really remembering it. Or not really consciously understanding why you're doing it. And then eventually, as you start to realize, wait a minute, I'm doing that. And then as you start to do it, you'll start to be like, hey, I'm doing the thing. And then you can start pulling yourself back. It's a multi-step process that requires a lot of iteration, much like game design. It's a game in and of itself. And then you can actively push through. You can realize that the emotion is a natural reaction. Accept it. Don't try to force it away. Or thinking you're an idiot for having it, and then learn to process it in a healthy way. And just like how the habit was created in the first place, you can rewrite new habits by pushing through and changing your actions. Things like learning to just put stuff on the page to overcome mental blocks was one for me. And now anytime if I feel I'm procrastinating, I'm like, hey, just, do it, put something down. I don't care. You're procrastinating. And now I've learned to acknowledge, I've learned to see that and become better for it. Knowing the feeling of procrastination that's due to my voter trait and pushing. I just said that. And it does get easier over time. And that's it. So hope you found it useful. Yes, cognitive behavioral therapy. Thank you. I did get it right. Woo-hoo! I just couldn't say it. But that's my talk. And in ways that I've just my observations and things I've known from my journey in life and how it's affected my work career. So I don't know the best place to do questions. I don't know if we should just I can just answer them in the stream chat here, or if we should go back to Discord. You. Yeah, 3 minutes. Okay. Woohoo! Oh, the secrets. I do find it. Yeah, someone found it useful. Anybody? Also, if there's questions outside of this that you do want to have answered, you can find me on LinkedIn. Give me the secrets of gaming. Make something fun. That's it. Mobile gaming is pretty cool. It's different. The thing I'm finding the most frustrating though is the pattern of how people are getting money and monetization is very annoying based on time that putting in all it's just like it's kind of like how the airlines have basically said, you know what, there's a lot of barriers to fun in this process, we can make you pay your way out of these barriers. And that's, I get it, they got to make money, but it's some of it's just to the point of like, really, it's like nth degree. Do you have any thoughts on being mindful of emotions in teams if others on the team aren't mindful of themselves? um yeah, it's, I mean, you can't expect everybody to change, right? I mean, it's one of those things where you have to, I would learn to adapt to the people that were difficult to deal with as best I can. And you know, if it ever gets to a problem of unprofessionalism, you raise that to your boss, right? You don't tolerate that. Make sure it's really unprofessional though. Someone just saying like, just someone just being like, oh, I don't like this, or I don't think this is fun, and it hurts your feelings or something. Don't. That's not being unprofessional if they said it and they said it in a professional way. But if someone's just being, snarky, mean, whatever, and just being an absolute jerk about things like that, yeah, there should be an expected level of professional in the office. But otherwise, the best you can do is learn to cope with it and try to have some empathy, and then minimize your. It sounds like an avoider tendency, but you know, you you do the interactions you need to do with them to get your job done. Don't avoid those, but you don't need to go out of your way to hang around them. If you're running a large team of people, is there a way to learn how to create an environment where people feel less anxiety when receiving and giving feedback? Uh, Usually reminding people that all feedback is encouraged, that there is no such thing as bad feedback. There is no such thing as dumb feedback. It's like, hey, we want to hear your thoughts. Um, Sometimes, maybe putting it in a questionnaire so that way you don't if it needs to be, if some people really have a problem getting over that, you can anonymize a questionnaire so that way people play the stuff individually at their desks, they write up their thoughts, and then be able to give that because sometimes people have a problem. The group setting can be an issue. Not everyone does well in group settings. I think that's twofold. I think people that don't do good in group settings need to analyze why and try to be better at it, because group settings are good for various things and are very important, but also there are times when it makes sense, like, here, okay, everyone download Lace Build, play it. Here's a Google questionnaire that we've written up. Answer the questionnaire, please. Do you ever have branching routes where one emotion might play out on one but another on the other? I've not done that personally, but there are games that do explore that. I'd say Mass Effect. There are times, or other games where it's like you're going light side, dark side, things like that. That's one way you could do it. But I'd say there's an avenue there to explore, because it is something that I don't think has been explored a lot, but it is difficult to do. Also, any advice on if we misdiagnose the reasons we feel a certain way, relating to your thoughts on asking why? Like, if I decide it's because X happened, but it was actually Y, how would we tell? Um, I mean, the first thing I'm going to say is go to a psychiatrist or a therapist if you're having really deep feelings on certain things. But otherwise, it's an exploratory process, and that part of it is because I've gone through that as well, where I'm like, I think it's this, and then I've come to find later to find, oh no, actually there was another thing behind it that was leading it. You just have to keep an open mind and you have to keep digging. So the other thing is don't also get in the mindset of like, I found the thing that's bothering me. Success, and then never be open to realizing, oh, I might be wrong, because that's part of the process. At a recent talk, one of our speakers put it as Facebook feedback is a gift, which was a good way of, I want to say Facebook is a gift. I'm like, no, which was a good way to look at giving and receiving feedback. Yeah, that's a very good. Yes, feedback is a gift. You can't make a great game without it. I mean, it's very difficult to do. How much more? Or I was going to say, how much more time do I have? I don't. Or last question. There we go. Someone. Oh, well, then I just answered it. Uh, yep. Hold on. Not a boomer, Gen Xer. Get it right. You're welcome. Of course. Yeah, please. Thank you.